Hello, fellow explorers, and welcome to the Esoteric Explorer channel. I'm your host, Paul, and in today's video, I'm very honoured to be joined by somebody called O'r Golwyg. His channel, which I've listed down below in the show notes, is a rich smorgasbord of information on Arthurian history. And I find his approach to this history very insightful, unbiased, and very rational. So I'm delighted to have him on with me today. So please give a warm welcome to O'r Golwyg. Hello, mate.
Very much for the kind introduction.
That's a pleasure. I've been really enjoying your videos over the last year or so. And as I say, I find your approach really rational and unbiased when it comes to this history. So
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay. So first of all, mate, how did you get into this history?
Well, I suppose it was at the end of one of the lockdowns. I think it was one of the 2021 ones.
Okay, fairly recently then.
Yeah, I suppose you could say so. I've got a background in the Welsh language. I'm Welsh myself. You might be able to tell.
Yeah, I've noticed that, yeah.
So I know a bit about Welsh history, Welsh culture, and the Welsh language, my native tongue. So I do have a background in that. But then I saw Ross Broadstock's broadcasts on Facebook. So Ross Broadstock was a family friend, actually. So I recognized him when he was on the screen. And I got into his show. So that's what kind of brought me into the subject, really. And then, obviously, Ross sadly passed away. He was a great man, by the way. And then I suppose I then really started researching it a bit more. And then I thought, I found some interesting information, an earlier source for the Mynydd Baden association with Mount Baden. Most people don't accept it, but there was a 19th century source, a late source, that sort of recorded the folklore. So I put that on YouTube, and then I thought, I quite enjoy this. So I put a few more stuff on.
Glad you did.
So that's how it's gone.
Brilliant. Okay. So I suppose the best place to start with this is the first King Arthur identified by Wilson and Blackett, which would be, I think, the son of Magnus Maximus. So can you give us your opinion on this potential King Arthur?
Okay, so yeah, they had this idea that there were two King Arthurs. I think this is probably a good point now to go and have a look at the earliest sources that talk about Arthur. Yeah, like I said, I've been interested in this in the last couple of years. And I think, well, I'm quite optimistic, at least, that there is a historical route to the Arthur story. Mm-hmm. It's not for definite. We have to concede that Arthur does lack a great deal in contemporary corroboration, so records from his own time. Mm-hmm. Notably, he wasn't mentioned by Gildas, for instance. I think you mentioned this with Peter Chesborough.
That's right, yeah.
Hello, Peter, if you're watching, by the way. Yes, so he wasn't mentioned by Gildas, but maybe we shouldn't have expected him to have been mentioned because it wouldn't have suited Gildas's rhetorical goals, perhaps. That was, a religious polemic. He was calling the Britons sinners, etc. And he didn't mention many people, really. And you also mentioned that bit of folklore from Giraldus Cambrensis, I think was the source. He said that Gildas destroyed all the mentions of Arthur. Did he throw him in the sea or something?
Yeah, that's right. That's the legend, yeah.
There's a bit of folklore up in Ruthin, northeast Wales, as well. There's a stone there called Mynheil, where Arthur supposedly beheaded Gildas's brother. That was the source of the enmity, supposedly. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then we've got the Arthur of romance, the Arthur of fiction, the Arthur of myth. That's all in the Welsh tradition as well. But I suppose that Arthur became so famous, his deeds became so well known, that he got assimilated into these mythic legendary cycles and became a kind of fictional character that took on a life of its own. Mm. He was very popular in medieval Europe, probably the most well-known literary cycle of medieval Europe based on Arthur. We kind of have to strip all that away, don't we, to find the historical root.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so best sources, the Welsh Annals, the Annals Cambriae. There's 2 mentions of Arthur there, and this seems to be historical. There's no mythical element to it at all.
How is his name recorded in that history? Sorry.
So can you say it again?
Yeah, how is his name recorded, written down?
Well, they say fought 2 battles. So the first one was the Battle of Badon. That was a battle that was previously mentioned by Gildas as well. I think Bede mentioned it. But they don't mention Arthur at all, did they? Neither Gildas or Bede. So this may be the earliest reference to Arthur as the person who led the Battle of Badon, which was supposedly a great victory for the Britons over the Saxons.
Mm.
And I think that there's no AD dating in it. It's dated from a year 1, and it's believed that Badon corresponds to the year 516 or somewhere around there.
Okay.
And then the other mention is that he fell at Camlan with Medrawd.
Yes.
So Mordred. And that would be the year 537. I've heard some people try and explain that as they didn't die, but I only read it as they both died in battle. I think that's what it's meant to say.
Okay.
Okay, so there's the Annals Cambriae. That seems to be a historical source, and it actually dates Arthur as well. Then we have the Historia Brittonum. I suppose you could say that that is the earliest. If you don't consider the Annals Cambriae to be earlier, that would be the earliest source that actually records the deeds of Arthur.
Mm-hmm.
There are various recensions of it credited to different authors, most famously Nennius, although that attribution is doubted. But that was written in about 829, and it calls Arthur a leader of battles. It doesn't give an explicit date for him, but he's sequenced after Octa arrived in Kent. I think that's believed to be first half of the 6th century.
Yeah.
And I'll give you the word in now. It's quite brief, really. It just says that then Arthur fought against them, meaning the Saxons, in those days with the kings of the Britain, but he was himself leader of battles. So the title is actually Dux Bellorum.
Right.
It doesn't call him a king. I suppose it doesn't preclude him from being a king. But I suppose you'd say he's more of a warrior, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And then it lists 12 battles. The locations are kind of either disputed or unknown. And then one of them was Badon. And then another was Gwinion. I'm guessing information on the Battle of Gwinion. The 8th battle was in the fort of Gwinion, in which Arthur carried an image of Saint Mary, ever virgin, on his shoulders, and the pagans were put to flight on that day. There was a great slaughter upon them through the strength of our Lord Jesus and through the strength of Saint Mary the Virgin, his mother. He was a Christian warrior, basically, strong connection then with Christianity. Okay, how am I doing so far? I've got a couple more to mention. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's great. I was going to ask you about. Go on, you do that first. Finish up, and then I'll ask you another question.
Well, so annexed to the Historia Brittonum is a gazetteer of the wonders of Britain. It's called Mirabilia, the Wonders, and Rhyfeddodau in Welsh. And they twice mention Arthur. It's not clear if it was originally part of the Historia Brittonum, but it's generally believed to contain early material, but in quite a folkloric style. But I suppose the general picture of Arthur from the Mirabilia is once again as a soldier, and it actually gives him location as well, places him in or around southeast Wales, and I've got the actual mentions here as well. So names are Carn Cabach, and it says that while hunting the boar Troit, so that seems to correspond to Twrch Troith, which Arthur hunted in a prose tale called Culhwch y Golwen. I'll tell you about that later.
Yeah.
Anyway, so while hunting the boar Troit, the soldier Arthur, Arthuri Militis is the Latin, gathered together a heap of stones beneath the stone which had the paw print of his dog Cabach. And the other one then is Licat Amr, seems to be the Welsh llygad I that we still use today. And that's the burial mound of Amr, his son. And it says again, the soldier Arthurian Militis, and he himself killed him there and buried him. So two places where Arthur was said to have been, really, in or around southeast Wales. I know your question was about Wilson and Blackett, wasn't it? Because they place Arthur in southeast Wales as well. So you could say this is a tiny bit anyway, of corroborative evidence.
Yeah.
And I suppose, although it's folkloric, it at least tells us that people thought that Arthur was historical. But I suppose we lack the wider context, really, to say much more about it. But soldier is the kind of wording that's used.
Mm-hmm.
And then, before you get me back on track, can I just mention a couple of early Welsh poems as well?
Yeah, brilliant.
So the first one's a Gododdin, very well-known Welsh poem. It's attributed actually to one of the Cinfeir, the Neirin. You might know that name. He was mentioned in the Historia Brittonum as well. He probably lived in the 6th or maybe early 7th century. Mm-hmm. And the Gododdin is a series of elegies to some of the men of the north, the Hen Ogledd, the old north of Britain. And it's difficult to really understand what it was about, but we can infer some of the details. And it seems to be dedications to men that died at the Battle of Catraeth. People believe it was in Catterick, Yorkshire. It probably happened around year 600.
Okay.
The exact situation is not known. So quite a mysterious poem. Well, a compilation of verses anyway, because people think maybe it wasn't one poem as such. Series of Audlai. Anyway, one of the warriors was compared to Arthur. Mm-hmm. His name was Gwawrdir, and he was a great warrior who died while killing many others, but he wasn't quite up to the standard of Arthur. So even though it's quite a brief mention of Arthur, or non-mention, you could say, we could at least infer that Arthur's believed to be a great warrior once again.
Yeah.
Greatest of his day, because Gwawrdir wasn't up to his standard.
So there's more evidence for Arthur being a soldier than a king. Am I right in saying that?
Well, that seems to be the wording that's used in the older sources. Mm-hmm. It doesn't preclude him from being a king. We don't know, really. I think Gildas mentioned kings, didn't he? He mentioned 5 kings. We don't know what the sort of political situation was. And obviously the best known stories of Arthur from Geoffrey of Monmouth, mm-hmm. written in the high medieval period. And they were kings at that point, obviously. Mm. So Arthur is kind of anachronistically tied in with being a king in those sources, but maybe in his own day, it wouldn't have been kings as they knew him in the high medieval.
More like a tribal leader rather than a king.
You could say warlord, maybe. The other thing is people have speculated whether or not he held something like a Roman office. So we know of certain Roman offices from the late Roman period. The Comes Brittonum or something like that. I got them written down somewhere. And so did Arthur hold an office in this style, maybe? Was he a cavalry leader? We haven't got the details. He is linked to horses in the Welsh tradition. I've mentioned in one of my videos that it was said that his war horse was fearless to give injury. So it seems to be a proper war horse, at least. Mm. The dating of Gododdin is contested. To me, it seems to be in Middle Welsh. Some people have speculated that maybe it does go back to around the year 600. I suspect that it doesn't. I think it maybe we can take it back to as early as about the 9th or 10th century. It does show some archaisms in the language.
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly later. It's mostly later language.
Okay.
So on that basis, yeah, maybe it's quite a bit later than the period that it's set in. I think it would have had a didactic purpose actually in around that time. It kind of sets maybe like the ideal warriors. They went to battle, paid the price for their lord. It was an important message. Certainly, in the 9th and 10th centuries, Wales or the Welsh kingdoms fought against an increasingly unified England. So it would have been an important message at that point. But, maybe it does contain all the material as well. But I suspect that it doesn't really take us further back than the Historia Brittonum.
Yeah, okay. There was supposed to be a King Arthur that was the son, I think, of Uther Pendragon. Is that another version of Arthur, if you like?
So that's Arthur's father in the Historia region, Britannia, Geoffrey of Monmouth. There may be evidence for it in the early Welsh tradition as well, but it's not conclusive. It's not clear.
Right.
So that's where Arthur's father was called, according to Geoffrey of Monmouth. And after Geoffrey of Monmouth, the stories took on a life of their own, really, and became very fictionalized. Geoffrey's version is considered fictionalized as well, pseudo-history, people usually call it. But there's evidence of an Ithir, you'd call it in Welsh. There's evidence for this character in the Welsh tradition a bit earlier than this, but it's not clear what he was or what the relationship was with Arthur. Pendragon means something like head war leader, something like that. I know there are different explanations for the word.
But that's the only one I've heard of.
Yeah.
Are there others then?
I know your mate Ralph Ellis suggested something.
Oh, did he? What did he say?
Oh, let's not go over. Let's not. I'm sorry I mentioned it now.
Okay, let's move on. Brilliant.
All right.
Okay, so
can I just one more poem, very important one.
Brilliant.
It's called Geraint, son of Erbyn. Earliest version, the Black Book of Carmarthen, so from about the year 1250, but considered to be much older. Geraint seems to be one of the heroes of Dumnonia from the 6th century, from around the time of Arthur. The details are obscure again, often is in Welsh poetry. But Geraint is fighting somewhere called Llongborth. Could be the name of a place, could be a description of a place, means ship port. Location's unknown, but there are suggestions, of course. And Arthur's mentioned being there too, and he's referred to as Amiraudir, and that literally means emperor. Now, obviously, after this, Arthur, in stories like Geoffrey of Monmouth, for instance, Arthur's a European conqueror, and people speculated maybe this was the root of that idea, but maybe he's just used more figuratively as a sort of, great leader or something like that. And it also calls him Lliwiadur. That means kind of like the one who steers, particularly a battle. So once again, does that sort of tie in with the Dux Bellorum of the Historia Brittonum, for instance? Is he a soldier here, really? Again. There's other mentions of him in Welsh poetry as well, but it's more mythical in nature. So Preve Anodd and Pa Guru Porthor, the Echo-Celtic myth, and Arthur's been assimilated into that in the Welsh tradition as well, which means it's kind of hard to see what he originally was. Because those are the sources that I think, or the early sources, that give us an insight into the historical Arthur, anyway.
Okay.
So what was the question again?
I think my last question was on Uther Pendragon and Arthur being potentially the son of, or one of the Arthurs being the son of Uther.
Yeah. Well, it could mean sort of terrible war leader, something like that.
Yeah, military leader. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Okay. Well, I read a book called Arthurius Rex by Wilson and Blackett, but I read it well over 20 years ago now, so my memory of it isn't that great. But about a year or so ago, I got into the Britain's Hidden History YouTube channel with your friend Ross Broadstock, and that's how I really got into this stuff. Now, Ross was doing a lot of work for Wilson and Blackett, and he was a big supporter of their work. I just wondered what your take is on the Arthurian research that Wilson and Blackett did.
Okay, so obviously it's what I kind of started with, and I found it useful to get me into the subject.
Yeah.
But I didn't find a lot of the stuff particularly reliable, and I have commented on it on my channel. But for me, it was useful to read, but make sure you read plenty of other books as well. I'll show you some of Wilson's books if you like.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen these before? King of Glamorgan and Gwent, have you seen that?
Yeah. I've seen those on the, yeah, go on.
Yeah, Blackett was the illustrator. So there's
I didn't know that.
some good illustrations in there too. I've actually got 3 copies of that. I don't know how I came to acquire so many. And then that's their novel.
Okay.
King Arthur the War King.
Oh, right, yeah.
And I think a lot of the ideas are quite well suited to fiction, actually. It's not meant to be an insult. It's just they tell a good story. But then when you kind of come to research it for yourself, maybe it doesn't check out, but it is a good story. I'll give them that.
Mm-hmm.
And then Arthur and the Charters of the Kings.
Okay, I've not come across that one before.
Okay, so that is an edition of the Llandaff Charters. So there's a source from around the year 1100 that includes land grants given by the ruling dynasty in southeast Wales to the church. And in them, they record a figure called Athrwys ap Meirig, ap Tewdrig.
Mm-hmm.
And that is who Wilson believed was the source of King Arthur. The Arthur story was essentially his. So that's who he would call Arthur too.
That's the Arthur of Camlan, yeah?
I think so, yeah. That's who was Arthur too. You know, it's doubted by most. Do you want me? There's another good book, Arthurian Place Names of Wales by Scott Lloyd.
Oh yes, I've seen that on your channel. Yeah, brilliant.
Really good book. Make sure you get a copy of this if you're interested in this sort of thing.
Okay.
So he goes through the places, but he also goes through the historiography as well, and he covers Wilson and Blackett. And he talks about the Book of Llandaff that names Athrwys. And this is what he says. He says that the Latin text provides the name Athrwys Fili Maurici, and he's mentioned on 12 separate occasions, one of which refers to him as Rex Athrwys. So that would be king, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
The spelling of Athrwys is consistent throughout the manuscript, and this Welsh form is Athrwys. The Athrwys was the son of Maurici Meirig, the king of Gwent, and who had a son called Morgan, referred to as Rex Morgannog, king of Morgannog. 2 further individuals with exactly the same spelling, Athrwys, are also mentioned elsewhere in the manuscript, suggesting that the name form was in common usage. And then he goes on to say, really, that the idea of this was once popular. The connection between Athrwys and Arthur, and it was kind of resurrected by Wilson and Blackett in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually called him Arthwys, so they made it sound slightly more similar to Athrwys. That was based on a misquotation copy of a previous version. And let me just, I got some information on that as well. Just let me find it. Yeah, so the theory is referred to in the literature as the Silurian Arthur theory.
Right.
The Siluries were the people that the Romans encountered in the modern territory of southeast Wales and a bit further.
Yeah, that's going back to Caractacus, isn't it?
Yeah, he led them against the Romans, didn't he? Yes.
Yeah.
So essentially, they have Arthur as a prince of the Siluries, and at least as early, I should say, as the mid-18th century and onwards, perhaps influenced by Caerleon being there. That was an important place in the Historia region, Britannia.
Yeah.
That's where Arthur had his court. And Arthur's also mentioned in the Saints' Lives in that area as well.
Do you know if that was originally a Roman site, or was it British built, if you like?
I think there's a hill fort there, isn't there?
Yeah.
So adjacent to the Roman site.
Lodge Hill, I think, or something.
Something like that, yeah. So I know there's post-Roman activity there. What's been proposed is post-Roman activity, because a lot of these hill forts were occupied again after the Romans left. And the amphitheatre there was known as Arthur's Round Table, wasn't it?
Yep, that's right.
But obviously that's only recorded much later. So where was I going with this?
Well, we were looking at Wilson and Blackett.
Yeah. So it was a popular theory from at least the middle of the 18th century. But it seems that the name Athrois only became associated with Arthur because of a misprint in the text where he was called Arthois instead of Athrois. That's Lloyd's idea anyway. Now, I should say as well that there was an important scholarly work done on the Liber Landavensis, the Book of Llandaff, in the 70s and 80s by someone called Wendy Davis. And she redated Athrois and his dynasty, and she had him about 100 years too late to be Arthur anyway. So obviously, if you're a Silurian Arthurist, you don't accept this work, but generally Wendy Davis's dating is accepted, and she did that by sequencing the people mentioned in the charters who were said to be witnesses, and she sort of cross-referenced them and came up with that date.
Right.
And most people accept that, so Athrois would be too late.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, there's another mention of Wilson and Blackett as well in Scott Lloyd's book. I can read that out. Okay. Just let me find it. So he talks about amateur historians in King Arthur in Wales, and says the first works to have an impact upon Wales were those of Baron Blackett and Alan Wilson, who self-published their ideas in 3 large volumes in 1981. That's what I just showed you.
Yeah.
One of the 3 volumes was little more than a reprint of the 1840 Rees edition of the Book of Llandaff, with a new introduction, reiterating the identification of Athrois here, spelt Arthois, with King Arthur. So the 1840 edition has Athrois as Arthois, and that's what Wilson and Blackett used. The manuscript is digitized now, by the way, so you can go and have a look at it yourself.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know if I should read this bit out, but the second volume, in over 300 quarto pages of confusing text, outlines the research in more detail and made the suggestion that the difficulty in identifying the real Arthur is that there are actually 2 kings of that name and that their deeds have been amalgamated. They identify Antin D, a figure of the 4th century, as their Arthur I, and Athrois ap Meirig, the 6th century ruler of Glamorgan, mentioned in the Book of Llandaff as Arthur II, resurrecting the Silurian Arthur theory discussed above. The 3rd volume is a novel based upon their research, The authors place a strong emphasis on the works of Iolo Morgannwg, make frequent use of inaccurate Victorian editions of medieval Welsh texts, whilst ignoring most modern editions and discussions. There's some more, I'll keep reading. In 1983, an article in the Guardian newspaper reported that the authors claimed to have discovered the burial site of King Arthur in a cave in South Wales, Coed y Mwstwr, a forest in Pen Coed, near Bridgend. Following this publicity, Chris Barber, who had recently published a photographic book entitled Mysterious Wales, was contacted by Blackett and Wilson and asked if he would take photographs for the next book. The year 1986 saw the publication of Barber's popular sequel, More Mysterious Wales, as well as Blackett and Wilson's Arthurian Text Discovered, which included many of the same photographs. Blackett and Wilson did not publish another book until 1998, when The Holy Kingdom, co-authored with Adrian Gilbert, was released, and a much wider audience became aware of their theories.
Mm-hmm.
Book once again associated Arthur's burial with the cave in Coed y Mwstwr, but also identified the hill fort of Castlefield Camp, north of Cardiff, as the location of Camelot. And the hill of Mynydd Baden near Tondy is the site of the Battle of Baden. They also claimed that Arthur had been reburied at the ruined church of St. Peter's Supermontum, an isolated site on the hill above Llanharan. And that a pile of stones in a nearby field was his final resting place. The most audacious claim by the authors is that they had discovered a stone bearing the inscription Rex Artorius Fili Mauritius nearby. This stone obviously attracted interest from the media, but was never accepted as authentic by the academic community. As the editors of the Arthurian Annals note, although these amateur historical researchers stirred up considerable attention with their theories and a series of belligerent encounters with critics and the press, they were largely ignored by the scholarly community. And then Lloyd just wraps it up then with this comment about them and a few others. And he says that all the titles discussed above suffer from the same basic deficiencies: a lack of proper understanding of the reliability of source materials from different eras, an assumption that Ordnance Survey mapping can be used to reconstruct landscapes from over 1,000 years ago, and a lack of awareness of the academic literature that could have saved them from many errors. Despite these deficiencies, the titles are usually written in an engaging manner, with a sense of discovery that has proved to be very popular and seen sales in tens of thousands, sometimes rarely achieved by academic works. The increased level of public awareness of these works is self-perpetuating, as their claims get featured in the press, with a little help from the publisher's marketing team, and soon find their way into the local tourist literature. They also become source material for other popular works, and the Arthurian associations they put forward can become established through sheer repetition.
Mm.
Okay, so sorry, that was a long quote then, but that's kind of the academic position on them.
So did the academics, or were they coming from the position of complete ignorance? I think it was Alan Wilson used to say they had the advantage of complete ignorance, or were their findings valid, do you think?
Yes, all valid criticisms. Yeah.
Okay. What did you make of the what did you make of the excavation? I'm pretty sure I can remember seeing Wilson and Blackett on the news back in around 1990, possibly on BBC News. Yeah, I'm that old. When I was about 15 or so. What do you make of the excavation they did at St. Peter's Church I think it's in Miglamorgan, isn't it? Somewhere like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame. Obviously, I don't accept the alleged archaeological discoveries.
Okay.
And I just think the whole situation was a shame. We haven't got, as far as I'm aware, a reliable report in the public domain. It's a site in my local area, and I think it was a missed opportunity, really, to excavate an important site, and we haven't got. Go on, sorry.
I was going to say, so you think that the site itself is a valid historical site and is connected to King Arthur?
I don't know of the evidence that connects it to Arthur, but it was an important site. It's an important early Christian site, and there's actually a site adjacent to it as well that shows some earthworks, maybe the original Llan. So the original site might be next to it.
Wow, yeah.
And I think I've spoken to some people who were on the dig, and they showed me the archaeologist drawings that did show a beehive structure in the middle of the ruined church. But I think, as far as I know, a lot of the work afterwards in dating things just wasn't done, as far as I know.
Okay. What's the relevance of the beehive structure you mentioned?
Could be an early, well, I don't want to speculate. I'm not qualified to do so, but I mean, maybe you could say that was an earlier hermitage.
Okay, right, yeah.
Maybe you had a hermit there.
Because some people say that church goes back to the 1st century AD. Would you agree with that? Or do you think it's possibly later?
Well, that's what the evidence was. But it could go back, yeah, might go back before that. Who knows?
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Right. Okay, let's move on from Wilson and Blackett for a while then. So, just for the record, O'r Golwyg, you don't have the 6th century King Arthur surviving the Battle of Camlan and then emigrating to America.
No, I don't know what the evidence is for Arthur going stateside, to be honest. The Welsh sources are particularly clear that he died at Camlan. Let's have a look. I think I've got a Wilson quote somewhere. Okay, so Arthurius Rex discovered now.
Yeah.
We'll go into this. I've got 2 copies, actually. So, on Camlan, they say, we know a great deal about the Battle of Camlan from the Triads and from the lives of the saints, and nowhere do they state that King Arthur was killed. This is my edition of the Triads, Trioedd Ynys Prydain, edited by Rachel Bromwich.
Was it Geoffrey of Monmouth that said that Arthur died at Camlan? Was it Geoffrey that said that?
So, Geoffrey in the Historia Region Britannia uses the phrase, he was mortally wounded and then taken to the Isle of Avalon.
Yeah.
I think it might say to be healed of his wounds, but he disappears from the story and the crown passes to Constantine. Okay, so that's Geoffrey's story.
Yeah.
But the Welsh Triads, so have a look here. I think it's 51. So the Welsh Triads follows Geoffrey's story in Triad 51. But at the end, this was covered in my video, I think you've seen, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And then they took place the Battle of Camlan between Arthur and Medrawd, and Arthur slew Medrawd and was himself mortally wounded. And from that wound he died and was buried in a hole on the island of Afallach. So the Welsh Triad goes further than Geoffrey's story. He says that Arthur actually died and was buried at the Welsh name for Avalon. So I'd have to disagree with them on that. And then we also have the Annals Cambriae, as I already mentioned. That's a Welsh origin. It's a Latin text, but it originates from Wales. And that had Arthur and Medrawd fallen there, and it can only be read as died in battle. And what else do we have? We have the traditions of the survivors of Camlan as well. And they purport to name those who survived the battle. It was a very destructive battle. And I'm not aware of one that names Arthur. Could be wrong, you know, correct me in the comments if you were aware of the tradition. But obviously later fictions kind of have him still alive at Avalon, ready to come back if the Britons ever needed him. But that corresponds more with the Celtic otherworld, I think. So the implication of those stories, in my opinion, is that Arthur was dead in those stories, just in the otherworld.
The underworld, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anwfn in Welsh. There's an old poem with Arthur in it, where Arthur travels to Anwfn. It's called Pray They Anwfn, the spoils of Anwfn. It's attributed to Taliesin, but you know, might be later, or probably is later. And that seems to be a mythical journey to the otherworld as well.
There's a similar story that involves Bran the Blessed. Yeah, I was going to say, is there a possibility that the two stories have been confused?
Yeah, I think so. It's got a lot of the themes. It's a retelling, I would say. So Bran, Bendigeid Bran, is in the second branch of the Mabinogi. It features a cauldron, Pair Dad Eni, the cauldron of rebirth. Mm-hmm. Pray the Anwfn has this cauldron as well, or a cauldron. It's not called the Pair Dad Eni, but it's the same kind of idea, this voyage across the sea for the cauldron. Mm-hmm. And there's some other analogues as well, and there are analogues with wider Celtic myth as well, with the stories of Ireland. So obviously Britain and Ireland share tradition, or maybe one borrowed off the other. Right? I like to think that they share a really old tradition. I haven't got a clear sort of insight into it yet, but this is the sort of way the channel is going to be going. I'm going to be covering things like this.
Brilliant. Look forward to that. Great stuff.
I do need to research it a bit more.
Okay. All right. Just going back to Camlan, Rich. There are several Camlans dotted around in Wales, and I think there might even be one in Cornwall, possibly. So when we're talking about the Battle of Camlan, where do you personally place Camlan geographically?
Yeah, we don't know, and there were probably lots of Camlans all across Britain. Obviously, most of the territory of England now has lost the old Welsh names. Mm-hmm. So presumably there were a lot of Camlans in England as well, have lost the name. But when I looked at the Englynion Beddau, the stanzas of the graves, it mentions Camlan there, and because it co-locates it with a place called Tryfan, there's two of them in Gwynedd as well. I thought the implication was that it was in northwest Wales, but it's not clear. And there's three Camlans there that are close to each other, so we don't know which one it was, if it was either of them. But I think Patrick Sims-Williams, who's a really great Welsh scholar, I think he suggests that as well, that was the intended site in the Englyn, at least. Whether it was the real site, you know, we can't say. And there's a site on Hadrian's Wall as well, Campbell Glanna, and that would have developed into Camlan normally as well. So we can't really say, but there are some clues that it was the site near Dinas Mawddwy, maybe. If I was going to put a bet on it, maybe that's where I put my money.
Okay.
It's not clear at all.
Where's that? Dinas Mawddwy, is it?
Yeah, that's where Lawrence Main is, isn't it? I've got when I.
He's in McKinley. I know that.
Oh, is it?
I think he's in McKinley.
Not far from there. I went to see.
Yeah, I've got that.
Lawrence Main speaking, and I just opened it up, and there's some interesting things in here as well. £23 note. You seen that before?
No.
I think Lawrence was handing them out.
Good old Lawrence. Why was he doing that? Do you know?
He's a lay hunter, isn't he?
Yeah.
There's some stuff in here, but yeah, some good souvenirs from when I saw Lawrence.
Cool.
Yeah.
He's a very knowledgeable chap.
This is a good book, actually, because I know he gets information from dreams, but he's a diligent historian as well.
He is, yeah, definitely. He went to Oxford.
So yeah, it's worth looking at as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. I need to ask you about the video you recently made called King Arthur in Cornwall. So this was possibly opening up yet another angle to this story. So is this a separate King Arthur from the other Arthurs we've previously discussed today?
Well, I suppose when I read the sources, I'm only reading one King Arthur.
Okay.
So, do you know, the idea of two Arthurs, I think, comes from the fact that it was implausible for the 6th century Britain to conquer vast territories in Europe. And maybe the closest thing to it was when Magnus Maximus, he's a Roman soldier, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Based in Britain, took an army from Britain onto the continent, won battles in France, and took a big part of the Roman Empire. So that's the closest story that we have to it.
Yeah.
And the figures that Wilson and Blackett have proposed as the Arthur one, he's linked to Maxen. Maxen Wledig is the name in the Welsh genealogies, and he's in Welsh literature as well. So they connected to him. So it's quite speculative, really. But I mean, that's why the connection is made, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now, the Cornwall connection, that is made in early Welsh sources. So the triads again, they name one of the Tair Lleithegloeth as being in Cornwall, tribal thrones. And they call Arthur Penteirnedd. That means chief sovereign. So they had him at a location in Cornwall, location in Wales, and location in the north. That would mean the Hen Ogledd. So that would be all the British territory, you could say, at the time of Arthur. So he was chief sovereign of all the British territory, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's maybe a precursor to him being King of Britain later on in some of the stories.
Yeah.
That's the idea from that triad anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then the location in Cornwall, Cechiwig, it's called Cechiwig in Hernew. That was Arthur's court in another early prose tale, O'r Golwyg. So Arthur was there in that story as well. And then obviously Geoffrey of Monmouth called him the Boar of Cornwall. And he had him conceived, and I think the implication that is as well that he was born at Tintagel.
Right.
So I've been to that side. You've seen my video, I know.
Yeah, yeah.
It's an important, well, it's been proved by archaeology to be an important secular centre at the time of Arthur. I think almost 100 rectangular buildings from the period were uncovered. Pottery, amphorae, and it's an easily defensible site, a promontory fort. And at Geoffrey's time, we don't think there would have been much there. There's obviously a later castle there. It's taken to be inspired by Geoffrey's story. But what would have been there in Geoffrey's time? Maybe not a lot. So how did he know the story? Is it maybe some authentic bit of history? Did he know something? Because he does describe it actually as well. I've got the word in. So let me scroll through my notes. The notes are quite messy.
There's also a stone there, isn't there, that mentions Arthur, or there's an inscription that, yeah.
Inscribed stone was discovered from the period Artognu, so not Arthur, but I commented in the video that it was close. I got told off for that. But I know that Kamlesh Gautama on his website, Arthurian Web, check that out.
Mm-hmm.
Really knowledgeable guy, really good website, source of information. He suggested an alternative reading that's a bit closer to Arthur, so check that out.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, so Geoffrey's description of Tintagel calls the fort of Tintagel a safe place of refuge on the coast. He said that no power on earth can get us into the stronghold of Tintagel. It stands completely surrounded by the sea and can be reached only by a narrow cliff. A 3-armed knight could hold it against you, even though you had the whole kingdom of Britain at your back. So there we are. And it was accurate. We knew the site at least.
Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah, very important place.
So, what are some of the best books out there on King Arthur?
Oh, I'm glad you've asked me that, actually. Yeah. I was reading a really good one relatively recently.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I read it earlier, actually.
Right.
Reign of Arthur. Christopher
Okay.
Gidlow.
Who's that by?
Christopher Gidlow.
Christopher Camlan.
I know he's written more recent books than this, but it's a bit of a page turner, and they're very accurate. And I just like his analysis; it's very readable. So if you're new to the subject, I would suggest this.
Brilliant.
And then obviously I showed you the triads as well. Triad Ynys Prydain, Rachel Bromwich's edition.
Oh yeah.
So they list 3 things, and they seem to recall stories from the Welsh tradition. A lot of them are lost, and there's the notes in there are brilliant as well. So it tells you about all sorts of things in the Welsh tradition. Then obviously I've shown you Scott Lloyd's book, so it tells you what the place is, but also the historiography. And this one, The Arthur of the Welsh. It's just essays really on every aspect of the tradition, covering the history and the literature as well. So that's a good scholarly book. And I don't know what else I've got. Yes, this one. It's an important one. Arthur in Early Welsh Poetry.
Right.
So quite a slim volume there. It's Anne Jones. So there's good analysis in there about Arthur. He appears in quite a few early Welsh poems. The nature is quite different. They're quite difficult to interpret. So yeah, have a copy of that as well.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed that, O'r Golwyg. As I've said before, I really find your approach to this history very rational, unbiased, bang on stuff. If you haven't come across Richie's channel, it's called O'r Golwyg, which is linked underneath this video. Do please check it out. Some great stuff on there. Not just about Arthur either. You've covered a little bit of Brutus, I think, and 1 or 2 other chapters in history. So do check it out.
There we go.
Lovely. Okay.
Yeah, thanks very much, Paul. Big fan of your channel as well. So yeah, it was a great opportunity to come on today. Appreciate it.
No, I've really enjoyed it, mate. Thanks for that. All right. See you again. Cheers. Right, that'll do it. Okay, stop recording. I've stopped.